They lit Mike Tyson's daughter's hair on fire. Now they're about to face the most terrifying mistake of their lives. Watch till the end. Subscribe to the channel, share the video, and write in the comments what city you were from. A Father's Wrath, the mistake of three racist thugs. The neon glow of the streetlights flickered against the wet pavement of Chicago's South Loop as Maya Tyson strolled home from an evening out with her friends. The air carried the crisp bite of autumn, but she barely noticed. Her mind was still replaying the laughter and conversations from dinner. She tucked her hands into the pockets of her leather jacket, her curly brown hair cascading down her shoulders, swaying with each confident step. The streets weren't empty, but they had thinned as the night deepened. She didn't notice the three figures lingering near the alley behind a run-down liquor store. Their cigarettes burned like fireflies in the shadows, their laughter crude, their eyes locked onto her like a predator watching prey. Rhett, Cole, and Mason, three self-proclaimed enforcers of purity in a city that had long outgrown their outdated hatred, had been drinking, waiting for an opportunity to remind someone that people like them still existed. And tonight, their twisted luck had delivered Maya Tyson right into their crosshairs. "Look at her," Rhett sneered, his lips curling around a cigarette as he nudged Cole with an elbow. "Walking around like she owns the place." Mason cracked his knuckles, rolling his neck as he exhaled a plume of smoke. "Bet she thinks she's better than us. These types always do." Cole's grin stretched like an open wound, wicked and full of malice. He flicked his lighter open and shut, the metallic snap echoing in the quiet night. Maybe we should teach her some humility. Maya, still oblivious, turned the corner onto a quieter street, leading toward her apartment. The warm glow of the entrance was visible just a block away. Safety. So close. A beer bottle shattered behind her. The sharp sound sent a jolt up her spine, her steps halting for just a second. But she didn't turn around. She knew better than to engage with the late-night drunks of the city. Then came the footsteps. Heavy. Intentional. A slow, crawling dread began to grip her chest. She quickened her pace, her breath steady, her mind racing. The heels of her boots tapped against the pavement, echoing like a metronome keeping pace with her growing unease. But the footsteps behind her quickened too. Maya sucked in a breath, her heart thudding as she reached for her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she unlocked the screen. Just as she tapped to call her father, a hand clamped onto her wrist. "Where you going so fast, princess?" Rhett's voice was thick with amusement, but beneath it lay something uglier. Maya yanked her arm away, turning to face them. Three men, taller, broader, and reeking of whiskey and arrogance. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice steady despite the terror that clawed at her chest. Cole smirked, stepping in close enough that she could smell the tobacco on his breath. "Relax, we just want to talk." Maya's eyes darted around the street, searching for help. Someone, anyone, but the block was empty. "Not interested," she snapped, taking a step back, but Mason moved behind her, blocking her path. "We insist," Rhett said, flicking the lighter in his hand once more, the small flame dancing between them. Maya's stomach clenched as the realization hit her. This wasn't just harassment. This was an ambush. Cole reached for her hair, running his fingers through the curls with a sick fascination. "That's a shame," he said. "Bet you're real proud of this, huh?" Maya jerked her head away, her voice sharper now. "Get your hands off me." Rhett chuckled, shaking his head. "Feisty." Before she could react, he flicked his wrist, and the flame of the lighter leapt forward, straight toward her hair. Pain exploded across her scalp as heat seared through the strands. A scream ripped from her throat as fire licked at the ends of her curls. She stumbled back, frantically slapping at the flames as Mason and Cole burst into laughter, their cackles bouncing off the brick walls. "Looks like the princess lost her crown," Mason jeered. The burn was quick, cruel, But before the fire could spread, a voice, a stranger from the sidewalk, lunged forward with a jacket, smothering the embers before they could consume her completely. The flames died out, but the damage was done. The stench of burnt hair lingered in the cold air. Maya clutched the remains of her curls, her body trembling, her vision blurred by tears of rage and humiliation. And the three men just stood there, laughing. Cole pointed at her, his face twisted with glee. "You won't be showing that off anymore." Rhett cracked his knuckles. "Maybe next time you'll stay where you belong." Maya's breath came in ragged gasps. Her fingers curled into fists. She had never felt so helpless, so violated. But then, a sound, a presence. The air itself seemed to shift, the laughter of the gang members dying down as an energy heavier than fear settled over the street. From the other end of the block, slow, deliberate footsteps echoed. And then, a voice, deep, controlled, deadly. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life?" Maya's stomach twisted, not with fear this time, but relief. The three men turned, their bravado faltering as they laid eyes on the man approaching, the legend himself, Mike Tyson. His fists clenched, his jaw locked, his eyes burning with a fury that sent ice through their veins. Rhett swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing as he took a step back. Cole let out a nervous chuckle. "Hey, man, we were just—" But Mike wasn't here for words. He was here for justice, and they were about to find out just how merciless it could be. Subscribe to the channel, share the video, and write in the comments what city you were from. A Father's Wrath. The reckoning begins. The laughter of the three gang members still echoed through the street like a sinister melody, feeding off the silent horror of the onlookers. Their faces twisted with cruel amusement as Maya clutched the charred remnants of her once beautiful curls, her fingers trembling with rage and humiliation. The pain of the burn was nothing compared to the fury rising inside her. But before she could speak, before she could even fully process what had just happened, a new force entered the scene. A presence so powerful it seemed to steal the very breath from the air. The crowd instinctively parted, as if the arrival of this man was an event written in the fabric of fate itself. Mike Tyson. His towering figure emerged from the other end of the street, each step deliberate, controlled, like a predator closing in on its prey. His muscles, though no longer confined to the brutalist arena of the boxing ring, still carried the power of a man forged in the fires of battle. His hands, once the tools of championship glory, now curled into slow, deliberate fists at his sides, knuckles tightening with the weight of his fury. His eyes, cold, unreadable, locked onto the three men. The moment they turned and saw him, the laughter died. Rhett, the ringleader, was the first to react, his arrogance faltering for just a second as he took a step back. He had seen Mike Tyson before, everyone had. But standing before him now, witnessing that legendary glare in person, was a different kind of terror. Cole and Mason weren't as quick to recognize him. Mason scoffed, his smirk curling with overconfidence. "The hell is this? You heard Daddy?" He chuckled darkly, nodding toward Maya with mockery. "Came to pick up the princess?" Mike didn't respond. He kept walking, each step deliberate, each movement controlled. The silence in the street was deafening. Maya, still shaking, locked eyes with her father, and in that moment she saw something that sent a chill down her spine. This wasn't just anger. This was something deeper, something primal. Her voice was a whisper. "Dad, they—" Mike raised a hand, stopping her. His gaze never wavered from the three men before him. Rhett, regaining a fraction of his bravado, stepped forward, trying to puff out his chest, trying to convince himself he wasn't intimidated. "Listen, old man, I don't know who you think you are, but this isn't your business." He gestured to Maya dismissively. She was running her mouth, so we gave her a little lesson. Mike exhaled slowly through his nose, his nostrils flaring. "Lesson?" His voice was quiet, controlled, deadly. Cole flicked his lighter open again, the tiny flame dancing between them. "Yeah, a lesson," he echoed, his tone laced with arrogance. "Maybe next time she won't—" He never finished the sentence. Faster than anyone could react, Mike Tyson moved, a blur of motion, a violent storm unleashed in an instant. His hand shot forward, grabbing Cole's wrist in an iron grip before the flame could even flicker toward him. The crack of bone was sickening. Cole's face contorted in agony, his body twisting as Mike wrenched his arm sideways with effortless power. The lighter clattered to the ground as he let out a strangled cry. The crowd gasped. Rhett lunged, but he might as well have been moving in slow motion. Mike released Cole's wrist and pivoted, his fist driving into Rhett's gut with a force that sent the gang leader flying backward, his body folding in on itself as he crashed into a parked car. The impact left a dent in the metal, the alarm blaring through the night like a siren of justice. Mason, now realizing the full weight of their mistake, reached for something inside his jacket. A knife. Maya's heart stopped. But Mike was already there. Before Mason could even draw the blade, Mike Tyson's left fist exploded forward. It was a jab so precise, so brutally efficient, that it shattered Mason's nose before his hand even touched the hilt of the weapon. Blood sprayed from his face as his body reeled backward, collapsing onto the pavement like a sack of bricks. The street was silent except for the labored breathing of the three men writhing on the ground. The weight of what had just happened hung thick in the air. Mike stood above them, his fists still clenched, his breathing slow and steady. He had barely even broken a sweat. Maya watched, still clutching the remains of her hair, a mix of awe, relief, and raw emotion swelling in her chest. Cole whimpered, clutching his wrist, his eyes wide with terror. "You!" he gasped. "You broke my—" Mike took a slow step forward, towering over him. "You touch my daughter again," he said, his voice like a growl of thunder, "and I will break every bone in your body." Rhett, still gasping for breath from the blow to his stomach, couldn't even form words. Mason, his nose a broken mess, groaned in agony. The onlookers, who had once been frozen in fear, erupted in cheers, their voices a wave of triumph, of support, of justice. The tables had turned, and as sirens began wailing in the distance, signaling the arrival of the real law, Mike Tyson exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders as if he hadn't just taken down three men like it was nothing. Maya, her voice still shaking, whispered, "Dad, what happens now?" Mike didn't take his eyes off the broken bodies of the men before him. They get what they deserve. And as the blue and red lights flooded the street, the world knew one thing for certain. Mike Tyson had delivered a message, and these men would never forget it. Subscribe to the channel, share the video, and write in the comments what city you were from. A father's wrath, judgment, falls. The weight of the moment hung thick in the air, the atmosphere charged with the electricity of impending chaos. Mike Tyson's fists, still tight with the echoes of his righteous fury, hovered at his sides, his knuckles gleaming under the streetlights like weapons forged in battle. The crowd, caught between awe and disbelief, barely breathed as they watched the aftermath of his assault unfold. Mason lay sprawled on the concrete, his body twisted, a mixture of groans and sharp, pained gasps escaping his lips. Cole clutched his wrist, his face contorted in agony, while Rhett, the self-proclaimed leader, was still slumped against the dented car, his breath ragged from the blow that had driven the air from his lungs. Yet, despite their battered states, arrogance still festered in their eyes. Rhett spat blood onto the ground, his lips curling into a weak, defiant smirk. "You think this is over?" he coughed, straightening slightly. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, old man." Mike took a single step forward. It was slow, controlled, a panther closing in. What mistake would that be? His voice was deep, calm, but beneath it simmered an ocean of restrained power, the kind that sent chills down a man's spine. Cole, still cradling his shattered wrist, forced out a laugh, though his voice trembled. "You think you can just beat us down and walk away? Do you even know who we are?" Mike exhaled through his nose, unimpressed. "I know exactly what you are." His eyes narrowed. "Cowards who gang up on a girl." Rhett's smirk twitched. "You don't get it, do you?" he sneered. "We're not just some street punks. We have people in places that matter. You touch us, and you'll have the whole damn system coming down on you." Mike tilted his head slightly, eyes unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he chuckled, a deep, knowing laugh that sent a ripple of unease through the three men. "I don't need to touch you again," Mike said. He lifted his chin toward the flashing red and blue lights, now reflecting off the buildings. "The law will take care of you." Cole's face paled as the sound of approaching sirens grew louder. He turned to Rhett, panic replacing his bravado. "Man, we gotta go," he hissed, struggling to push himself up. But Rhett, still too consumed by rage and wounded pride, refused to move. Instead, he wiped the blood from his mouth and straightened. "No," he growled. "We're not running from this. I'm not letting some washed-up fighter ruin me." And then, in a single reckless motion, he reached inside his jacket. The second his fingers closed around the cold steel of his switchblade, Mike moved. Faster than anyone could register, Tyson exploded forward. A devastating left hook met Rhett's jaw before he could even flick the blade open. The sound of bone cracking split the air like a gunshot as his head snapped to the side. His body lifted from the ground for a brief moment before crashing face first onto the pavement. Silence. Cole and Mason froze, their faces drained of color as their so-called leader lay motionless, the knife clattering uselessly beside him. Mike exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing as he turned his gaze toward the two remaining gang members. "You got anything else you want to try?" Neither of them spoke. Mike's stare bore into them, heavy and unwavering. Their fate had already been sealed. Then, the NYPD squad cars came to a screeching halt at the curb, their doors flying open as officers spilled out, weapons drawn. "Hands where we can see them," one of them barked. The gang members barely hesitated before raising their hands, surrendering to their inevitable doom. An officer stormed toward the chaos, stopping short when his eyes landed on Mike Tyson, the legendary boxer standing amidst the wreckage of his own making. The cop's face shifted from shock to instant recognition. "Tyson?" he murmured, lowering his weapon slightly. Mike simply nodded. "These men attacked my daughter," he said, his voice steady but firm. "They set her hair on fire. The crowd can tell you everything." The officer, a seasoned man with lines of experience carved into his face, scanned the scene. The gang members, the broken bodies, the terrified looks on their faces. He turned his attention to the crowd, where dozens of witnesses stood, phones raised, recording everything. One by one, voices began speaking out. They jumped his daughter, 3 against 1. They burned her hair. They were laughing about it. The officer turned back to the gang members, his jaw tightening. "Is that true?" Mason, still bleeding from his nose, stammered, We didn't save it." The officer waved a hand, gesturing for his men. "Cuff them, all of them." The NYPD officers swarmed the gang members, forcing their hands behind their backs, slapping on the cold steel of justice. Rhett, still dazed from the knockout, barely flinched as they hoisted him off the ground. Cole whimpered as his injured wrist was jostled, while Mason was shoved forward, his head hanging low. Mike stepped forward slightly, his towering presence still commanding the space. "Make sure they don't get out of this," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The officer met his gaze. "Don't worry, Tyson. This time, the right people are watching." He gestured toward the countless phone cameras still rolling. The world had seen. There was no escaping justice now. As the police cars loaded the criminals inside, the crowd erupted into cheers, the tension breaking like a dam bursting. Maya, still shaken but standing strong, turned to her father. "Dad." Mike faced her, his features softening for the first time that night. He reached out, gently touching the remnants of her burnt hair. "It'll grow back," he said quietly. "But they'll never recover from this." As the last squad car pulled away, taking the gang members into the abyss of consequence, the legend of what happened that night in the streets of Brooklyn was already beginning to spread. Mike Tyson hadn't just fought back. He had delivered judgment, and the world had witnessed every second of it. Subscribe to the channel, share the video, and write in the comments what city you were from. A reckoning in the streets. The officer's question, "What happened here?" hung in the air like a war drum's final echo. The street was silent, save for the distant crackle of police radios and the fading cries of the three battered men now being dragged to their fate. Mike Tyson, his breathing heavy but controlled, locked eyes with the officer. His words dropped like thunder. "They played with fire, and they got burned." The weight of his voice rippled through the gathered crowd, a declaration that carried beyond just those present. The cameras, the witnesses, the world would see this moment. The senior officer, a man hardened by years on the job but not yet jaded, studied the scene before him. Three racist thugs, broken and humiliated. A daughter, wounded but standing strong. A father, a legend, who had delivered justice where the system had failed. He nodded once. No more questions were needed. "Cuff them," the officer ordered. His men complied without hesitation, yanking the gang members to their feet. Mason groaned, still dazed from the blow that nearly sent him through a car door. Rhett, his pride shattered along with his jaw, barely struggled. Cole, the last to be restrained, snarled through bloody teeth. "This ain't over," he spat, his words laced with desperate rage. "You think you're some kind of hero? The system don't work for people like you." Mike stepped closer, his presence a shadow of finality over the whimpering thug. "You're right," he said, his voice low but unyielding. "That's why I don't wait for it to." Cole's face paled as reality sank in. Mike Tyson wasn't just a legend in the ring, he was a force of nature, and they had picked the wrong storm to stand against. The officers hauled them toward the waiting squad cars, their protests swallowed by the slamming of doors and the roar of engines. The crowd, fueled by a collective sense of triumph, erupted into cheers. Applause, whistles, and shouts of justice filled the air. Maya, still shaken, turned to her father. Her voice, fragile yet resilient, wavered as she whispered, "Dad, my hair." Mike Tyson looked at his daughter, his pride, his legacy, and gently cradled her face. "It'll grow back, baby," he murmured, his strength wrapping around her like an unbreakable shield. "But those cowards, they'll never get their pride back." And with that, justice had spoken. Subscribe to the channel, share the video, and write in the comments what city you were from. Justice isn't given, it's taken by those who refuse to be silenced. Mike Tyson's story reminds us that power doesn't come from fists alone, but from standing against hate, fearlessly defending what's right. Racism and violence thrive when people look away, but change happens when we confront injustice head-on. Strength isn't just about fighting, it's about protecting, about knowing when to act and when to lead. Never let fear stop you from defending yourself or those you love. Stand up, speak out, and remember, true power lies in courage, unity, and the refusal to let hate win. Subscribe to the channel, share the video, and write in the comments what city you were from. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe Undercover Insights channel.